Learn English by story. Tonight I want your full attention. The way you listen to your friend, sitting beside you, telling you something painfully true and real. This story will give you a perfect lesson of life. So please stay with me until the very last word is spoken, and beside it will help you to understand English better way. This is a story about a mother who believed her only son had abandoned her while she was dying, and how wrong that belief truly was. But to understand what he was secretly doing every single night, we first have to go back to the terrible day everything suddenly changed forever. My name is Linda Hartwell. I am 64 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, in the same small house I raised my son inside. My husband Robert died 6 years ago from a sudden heart attack. Since then, it had only ever really been me and my son Daniel. Daniel was 34, a software engineer living 2 hours away, calling every Sunday, visiting on holidays, close than the way most grown children stay. Then, 8 months ago, a routine checkup revealed something truly devastating. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer, already spreading, already quietly stealing time I did not have. I told Daniel over the phone, my voice shaking, unable to soften words that had no soft way of being spoken to your only child. He went completely silent on the phone line for almost a full minute. Then he simply said, "Okay, Mom, okay," and hung up quickly afterward. That was the last real conversation we had. No visits followed. No phone calls came. No texts arrived asking how my treatments were slowly progressing. I moved into hospice care 3 months later, and the constant pain finally became too much to manage safely alone inside my quiet, empty house. I waited every single day for Daniel to slowly walk through that hospice door, to sit beside my bed, to simply hold my trembling hand. He never once came, not once, not during my worst nights, not during the moments I was completely certain I would not survive until morning. I told myself he could not handle watching me fade away slowly, that grief had frozen him somewhere far away from this quiet hospice room. But underneath that gentle explanation, a colder truth kept whispering louder every night. My only son had simply, quietly abandoned me while I was dying. I cried more over his absence than I ever cried over the cancer itself. If I am being completely, painfully honest with you right now, one quiet evening, my hospice nurse, a kind woman named Renee, sat down beside my bed holding a small clipboard, looking slightly confused about something. "Linda," she said carefully, "did you know that someone has been sending fresh flowers to your room every single week for the past 2 months?" I blinked slowly, confused. Flowers? I honestly just assumed those came from my church group, or perhaps an old coworker simply checking on me occasionally. Renee shook her head slightly. "There is no name attached, no card, nothing at all. Just cash left at the front desk each time anonymously, weekly." A few days later, Renee mentioned something else that made my chest tighten sharply. "Linda, your remaining medical balance was paid off entirely last week." "That's impossible," I said quietly. "My insurance only covers partial hospice costs." Someone would have had to pay several $1,000s themselves, entirely and completely. "The front desk could not tell me who paid it," Renee admitted. "It was handled quietly, in cash, by someone who refused to leave their name." I felt something strange quietly stirring deep inside me. Somewhere between fragile hope and complete confusion, wondering who could possibly be watching over me secretly. Then, one particularly difficult night, I woke up suddenly around 3 in the morning. Disoriented from medication, certain I had heard a familiar voice nearby. I called Renee weekly the next morning, asking if anyone had quietly entered my room overnight while I was sleeping deeply from all the medication. She checked the overnight visitor log carefully, her eyebrows slowly rising. "Actually, yes, someone visited last night. They signed in as M. Hartwell, around midnight." My heart pounded loudly. M. Hartwell? I honestly do not know a single person with that name. My late husband was Robert. My son is Daniel. Renee looked equally confused. The overnight security guard said it was a man, tall and dark-haired, who stayed nearly 2 hours before quietly leaving. Fear crept slowly into my chest. Was someone impersonating a family member? Was I being quietly watched by a stranger while completely unconscious and defenseless? I barely slept at all that following night, terrified of who this mysterious visitor calling themselves M. Hartwell might actually truly be inside my quiet room. The next morning, I firmly demanded that Renee show me the security footage from the overnight hallway camera near my private hospice room entrance immediately. Renee hesitated for a moment, then finally agreed, pulling up grainy black and white footage on a small tablet screen beside my trembling, anxious bed. I watched a tall figure walk slowly down the hallway around midnight, pause outside my door, then quietly slip inside without making a single sound. My breath caught sharply in my throat. Even in blurry gray footage, I recognized that walk instantly. That posture, that familiar way he tilted his head. "That's Daniel," I whispered, tears quickly filling my eyes. "That is my son." But why on earth would he sign in under a completely different name? Renee called hospice administration immediately, requesting clarification. While I lay there shaking quietly, overwhelmed completely by confusion, fear, and something dangerously close to fragile hope. That evening, exhausted and deeply emotional, I asked the night staff to please wake me the moment anyone signed in under that mysterious name again. Just after midnight, Renee gently touched my shoulder. "Linda, someone is here now." My heart pounded hard as the door slowly, quietly creaked open completely. Daniel stood completely frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide with shock, clearly not expecting me to be sitting up, fully awake, waiting for him. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking instantly. "You are not supposed to be awake. I always come after you fall asleep completely every single night." I stared at him, tears streaming freely now. "Daniel, why? Why hide from me like this? Why let me believe you had simply abandoned me completely?" He sat down slowly beside my bed, his hands trembling badly. As he finally spoke the truth he had clearly been carrying silently for months. "When you told me about the cancer, something inside me just broke completely. Mom, I could not stop crying for days, alone in my apartment. I was terrified that if I visited while you were fully awake, you would spend your remaining energy comforting me instead of resting, healing, fighting. You have spent your entire life taking care of me first, before yourself, always. I could not let you do that again, not now, not here. So I simply started coming after visiting hours, after you had fallen asleep, just to sit beside you, hold your hand, and quietly say goodnight. I signed in under my middle name because I asked the front desk not to tell you I was here, afraid you would insist on staying awake. The flowers, the medical bill, all of it was me. I sold my car, Mom. I picked up extra freelance work every single night after visiting. I did not want money to be something you worried about while you were already fighting so hard for your life every single difficult day." I reached for his hand, my chest aching with a mixture of grief, relief, and overwhelming love I had almost convinced myself was gone forever. "Daniel, I thought you did not love me enough to say goodbye properly," I whispered, my voice barely holding together under the weight of everything. He shook his head firmly. "I loved you too much to say goodbye while you were still fighting. I was not ready to let go yet. Every night I sat here, Mom, I told you everything. About work, about my fears, about how much I would miss you every single day. You just never heard any of it, because I could never quite say those words while you were awake enough to actually comfort me instead. We stayed awake together that entire night for the first time in months, finally speaking honestly, finally facing everything neither of us had said aloud. In the weeks that followed, Daniel visited during daylight hours too, no longer hiding, no longer carrying his grief silently through empty midnight hallways alone. We talked, laughed softly, cried openly, and finally said everything we had both been too afraid to say before that single midnight moment changed everything. I passed away peacefully 3 weeks later, holding my son's hand, fully awake, fully present, fully loved in a way I never once doubted again. I learned something important through everything that happened during those final difficult months of my life. Something I want every single person watching to remember clearly. Love does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly at 3 in the morning, asking absolutely nothing in return except simply to stay close. If you understood every single word of the story clearly today, that genuinely means your English is becoming stronger with each and every story you finish. Have you ever discovered that someone loved you far more quietly and far more deeply than you ever truly realized? Tell me honestly in the comments below.